Hello and welcome back to CQ, the AWS Certification quiz show, where I'm back with one of our regulars, Kerry. Kerry, welcome back to CQ.
Thanks for having me and welcome everyone out there. I love doing this show with MJ, so I'm so happy to be back.
It's good to have you. We had more time this morning to have a bit of a catch up because we didn't have to prep, so that was awesome. For those viewers who haven't met you, Kerry, why don't you tell us what you're currently doing here at AWS?
Thanks, MJ. So for those of you out there who I haven't met, I'm a Solutions Architect here at AWS. I spend a lot of time with customers talking about the cloud and talking about their workloads, what they're trying to move to the cloud, things that they're trying to do with, their infrastructure. Then maybe they're migrating a workload to the cloud, or they're trying to look at best practices, things that they can do with their workload. So I spend a lot of time with customers. It's great.
I've seen you more and more online recently as well, so you're becoming a bit of a presenter guru yourself.
I enjoy it. It's fun.
Good, good. And since we last saw you, Kerry, what have you been up to? Where's your journey at?
So I'm spending a lot of time, as I said, talking to customers. During this pandemic at the moment, it's been really interesting times. We spend a lot of time talking to these customers and trying to help them through this really crazy time. And the other things that I'm also trying to do is spend a lot of time with different groups. The most recent one I did with a group in Brisbane called Girl Shaped Flames, and I spent a lot of time talking to young girls who were looking to come into this industry. It's actually a great industry for these girls, so I'm really trying to encourage a lot of girls to come into this industry because we really have a lot of great things that you could do if you're if you're looking at STEM subjects in high school, for example. There's a lot of great things you can do in that technology industry that can really help you. So I do a lot of that. What are some of the other things? Oh, I'm also studying for my
next certification.
Yes, my next certification, which is a specialty cert. So I'm looking at doing the big data, or actually it's now the data analytics cert.
That's right. So we had Drew on the other week, and we had our first go at the data analytics cert actually. So if you were watching that, you might have a few tips. Kerry.
I know. I haven't watched it. I have to go and watch it. I'll go and watch that one before I sit my exam. So I'm really looking forward to doing that cert actually, because data analytics is a bit of a passion.
It's your sweet spot now, right?
Yeah, it is.
You started to specialise a bit since we last saw you?
Yeah, I have, and I spend a lot of time talking about analytics services, Redshift, data warehousing, business intelligence. So it's really the area that I like to spend time in, so it's been great.
That's awesome. I think we got wind of that, and producer John might have slipped a few questions into our essay associate episode that we're doing today, our penultimate episode of season 2 actually. But before we jump into our questions, Kerry, as always, why don't you tell us where we are streaming from today?
So we are actually streaming from the Sydney office, and as you can see, we have today I've chosen a Minecraft background, and that actually is because it's school holidays at the moment. So in Sydney it's school holidays. I think in a few parts of Australia it's school holidays. So I've chosen a gaming background with Minecraft. My son actually picked this background. So I'm imagining all the kids that are home that are sitting there and gaming and spending time on games like Minecraft. so that's
a bit of an ode to our schoolies today.
It sure is. To all the parents out there that actually have their kids at home.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Like me.
So while we were in the world of Minecraft,
yes.
nearly said Warcraft. Minecraft. Shall we jump into our first question of the day?
We should, yes.
A reminder for all our viewers, we are looking at the Solution Architect Associate Level exam today with Kerry. And if you'd like to vote along, please type in the number of the corresponding answer into the chat, and that will add to our votes today.
Yay.
Okay?
Cool.
Let's do it. Question number 1. Of course, we're going to start with a bit of global infrastructure. Why would we not, now that we have Kerry back? Here we go. Number 1. A bucket, Kerry, was successfully created in the Singapore region. But when creating a bucket in the Hong Kong region, a relatively new region, this error appeared. The AWS access key ID you provided does not exist in our records. Kerry, what is the likely cause of this error?
I like this question.
Great start.
Yes. Okay, let's get started. So I'm actually going to look at some of these answers that we have here, and I'm going to go through the ones that I think are not the correct answer. So I'm going to jump down to 4. A bucket with the name already exists in another region. So if you were to get that as a bucket already exists, when you go to provision the bucket, it will actually tell you straight away. So that's not the answer.
Okay.
Buckets are global, cannot be created in a specific region. Well, that's not true, because when you create a bucket, it actually creates it in a specific region. So as opposed to the names being global, the buckets they're not global, so they will be created in a specific region. IAM credentials were not copied to the Hong Kong region. So that's not the right answer either. So I'm going to go with the first one, which is the Hong Kong region has not been enabled. So the reason I'm saying that too is because with the newer regions, they're not enabled by default in the console. So you would have to go in and enable those regions. So for that, for this particular answer, I'm going to go with number 1.
So HK and our 3 regions since, we have Bahrain, Cape Town and Milan. Is that right,
Yep,
Kerry?
that's it.
So those are all regions disabled by default.
Yep.
Is that what we're saying?
So you would have to go into the console and you would have to enable it. Actually, I actually tell a lot of customers when I talk to them, I'm like, you know what, you should actually only enable the regions that you're going to use. It's actually a bit of a security thing. So if you had regions enabled, all the regions enabled, and you're, for example, only using the Sydney region. Say, for example, your infrastructure only can exist in Sydney. So by default, if you don't want to use those other regions, you should actually disable them. If you're never going to use them, you can always enable them later, because then that actually prevents. So if you had an incident, a security incident, your account got hacked, and someone went and spun up all these EC2 instances in a US region, for example, and you didn't know about it or you didn't have any monitoring on it, then that can actually, you can get, like, at the end of the month, this bill shock and say, oh gosh, where did all this come from, and not know about it. So it's a good opportunity, you know, if you're using AWS to not enable regions if you're not going to use them.
So disabled by default, security, manageability, tick, tick. Locking in number 1?
I'm locking in number 1.
It is almost there on the poll. We have a few people going for number 1. Some people did go for number 2. So let's reveal that first answer. Of course it is number 1. Off to a flying start. I would expect nothing less from our regular Kerry. Let us jump to number 2. I'm waiting for these data or Redshift questions to come up.
Yeah, I think
we're not there yet.
We haven't got there yet.
We're at security. All right, Kerry, an IAM role has been assigned to an Amazon EC2 instance. The 2 applications running on the instance each need different permissions to AWS services. How can this access be granted in the most secure manner?
So this is a good question, because the key to this question is the most secure manner. Because you could, if I look at all the questions very quickly.
The answers, yep.
Sorry, the answers. The answers. You could actually do it a couple of ways. You could, for example, if we look at number 4, we could
combine the permissions into a single IAM role.
Yeah, you could do that. But the issue is that the most secure? Because that wouldn't be what we call least privilege. So in a least privilege manner, you essentially only want to assign the number of permissions, all the permissions and the access that's absolutely necessary, and you deny everything else. So that would be allowing one of the applications or the opposing application more permissions than is absolutely needed. So we'll rule out number 4. I will jump to...
It was pretty popular when we first opened the question, and now it's just gone back a bit, so that's good. Good explanation.
I'll go to number 1, assign separate IAM roles to each application. Well, you can only assign 1 IAM role per instance, so that's definitely not going to work.
And that's just inaccurate. It is the most popular answer at the minute, so hopefully that will now decrease.
The number 3, we'll look at number 3, launch the first application, change your IAM role, assign to the instance and launch the second. Well, it's kind of not going to work because of the IAM role depending on which application, one of them's not going to have enough permissions to launch. So,
Okay, yep.
so given this whole least privilege, if you did apply least privilege, then that's not going to work either. So I'm going to lock in number 2 for this specific answer because
Store separate IAM user credentials.
Yep, on the instance. So that will allow each application to have an IAM user that will allow them the permissions that they need.
The other key part to the question. All right, locking in number 2. Number 1.
Nobody voted for it.
No, actually,
Wow.
Producer John did just point that out to me. No one voted for number 2.
Okay.
Are you feeling nervous?
Yes. Uh-oh.
Number 1 was actually the most favoured after number 4 shot out of the marks. Let's reveal the answer.
It is number 2.
Dun, dun, dun.
I was like, oops.
Absolutely, number 2 is correct. Flying through these, let's move on to number 3. Ready for a bit of networking?
Oh.
You know, I promised you data questions.
Where's my data question, MJ?
They'll be here. We're just throwing in a bit of networking.
Yes, networking.
All right, Kerry.
Not my favourite topic, but anyway,
we're going to go for it anyway.
Okay. Let's
It's all
talk
right
about
to get it wrong. Our audience is here to
I
help
know.
you. So
No,
get
that's good.
voting.
Okay.
Audience. An Amazon EC2 Linux instance has been launched in a private subnet of an Amazon VPC that does not have an internet gateway or a virtual private gateway. How can you log into the instance?
That was a long question.
It was I think,
You had to
but I
take
didn't
a
even
breath.
stumble until the end.
Okay, so the key thing in this question, if we have a look at it, is launched in a private subnet and does not have an internet gateway. So if we look at a VPC structure in AWS,
We need Zoe's little whiteboard. I don't know if you saw Zoe's episode. She
No.
brought in this whiteboard
Ooh.
and it was amazing.
I
Note
could've-
to self, bring the whiteboard back.
I would have loved a whiteboard. I could have just whiteboarded here. I could have drawn between us and
You're
do a
just
little-
going to have to be extra descriptive.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, so it's in a private subnet, but there also is no internet gateway on a VPC. So when you have no internet gateway on a VPC, that means it's actually completely private. Because in order to make a subnet public, you need to have an internet gateway. So the actual whole VPC is completely private. So if we start to go down the list and we say launch and connect to a Bastion instance in a public subnet, well, that can't be right because we've just said that we don't have an internet gateway. So there is effectively no public subnet in this particular VPC setup.
So easy one to get rid of,
Yep,
which is
yep.
actually the leading one on the ball at the minute.
That's the one that we wouldn't, because there's no public subnet. Without an internet gateway, there's no public subnet. Use EC2 instance connect with a temporary key pair. Well, because it's not public, again, we actually require an internet gateway to be able to use the EC2 instance connect to be able to do that. So that's not going to work either.
Okay.
If we skip down to number 4, it's not possible to connect to the instance. Well, it actually is, which is obviously, you probably know where I'm going to from here. So number 4, we're going to cross that one out as well. You can actually use Systems Manager to connect to that instance. So if you do create a VPC endpoint will allow you to connect to that instance. So using Systems Manager is a great way.
Do you want to tell our viewers for who are unfamiliar with Systems Manager?
So Systems Manager, when you log into the console, you'll have an option called Systems Manager, and it will allow you to actually connect to those instances. We actually promote Systems Managers a lot to a lot of customers. For example, if you didn't want to have a Bastion host, for example, like a jump box to be able to get, then Systems Manager is great. Systems Manager has a lot of different features in there. You can push code to instances. You can do a lot with Systems Manager actually. So it's not a very, with a lot of the customers that I talk to, there's not been a lot of, I don't see a lot of customers using it. So I do talk to a lot of customers about it and say, all right, well, have you thought about Systems Manager? Have you
Doing
thought
things
about,
differently.
so a lot of these ancillary services that, when you first start implementing in the cloud, when you first look at, the different ways to architect like a workload. I think a lot of customers still thinking about traditional data centers, how you would set that up, have a traditional VM and lots of ways that they would do it traditionally. But there's lots of other options that you can do when you're on AWS. There's lots of ancillary services that are out there that can really help with how you manage your workload in the cloud.
Awesome. So jumping back into...
sorry, we didn't answer the question.
That was perfect.
Okay, so then I am going to go with number three.
Big fan of Systems Manager. We seem to have on the cards here. Number one did come out on top. I think that went hard at the beginning before we explained why. Kerry is locking in number three. And it is number three.
So the other thing you can also do is you can actually now port forward using Systems Manager as well. So that's another really cool thing that you could do with Systems Manager. So yeah, you guys out there, you should try it.
There we go. Great.
Launch some instances and jump on Systems Manager.
We've convinced a few more people to use Systems Manager.
That's good.
This. All right. Is number four? Okay.
It's
Thank
a
goodness.
data question.
One of Kerry's faves. Your call out at the beginning. We finally got there. Whew. Glad I didn't have to break that promise, Kerry. Here we go. Amazon Redshift. Kerry, an Amazon Redshift database is deployed in a private subnet of an Amazon VPC. An AWS Lambda function in a different AWS account needs to query data in the Redshift database. How can this be configured?
That's a very interesting
Do you like
question.
this one?
I do.
Is this more up your
Because it
alley?
has Redshift in it. I like Redshift.
Your favourite product?
It's one of my favourite services. But I come from a background of data warehousing. So Redshift was one of those services that I spent a lot of time talking about. And I also did a talk on Redshift recently. It was a couple of months ago.
Right?
Yeah. So it was really cool. Anyway, back to the question because I digress. So configure VPC peering in the AWS Lambda function. Well, that kind of doesn't make sense. So I'm going to jump away from that one. It's not. I'm going to do what I normally do. So I'm going to go down to the ones that I don't think it is. It is not possible to connect the Lambda function to the Redshift database. Well, you can do that. So it's definitely not impossible to be able to do that.
Amazon Redshift.
Yes. And the other key thing in that question too is because the Lambda function's in a different AWS account. So we're talking about, cross-account access here. So that's why I'm saying, it is possible. Configure the Lambda function to connect to a subnet in the same VPC as, well, that's not going to work because we've just established that the Lambda function is in another AWS account.
Yep, we got that in the question, nice and clear.
Yep. So the only one that it can be is number two, which
no one has gone for again.
What is it with this
I
episode?
don't think I've seen this before.
But the other
Convince us, Kerry.
Okay.
Convince us of number two. Let's get some votes.
The reason why it is number two, and this is actually a very recent feature, so it's probably why a lot of our viewers are probably not realising that. But we recently released, I think it was it's like September. It's like this month. What we call a data API.
In September? Yeah, we tomorrow is October.
Oh yeah. And so the data API allows you to query a Redshift database. So it's actually pretty cool. So it's asynchronous. So you're going to send a query using a Lambda function to the Redshift cluster. And then you will also send a query to request any information back. Or maybe that query is, the results of that query will be used by some other application. So the data API is actually very recent. It's very new. Thanks, John, for posting that in the chat. But have a read of it. It's really, really cool for those who need a really secure access to your Amazon Redshift cluster. Then this will work really great.
I like what you did as well, and I remember you doing this on your previous episodes, being able to spot what just doesn't work with the question, inaccuracies, things that are supposed to be leading you in a wrong way. So I think that's a great tip.
That's my exam tip. Do I have an exam tip?
Yes, okay, we'll bring it up.
So, this is my exam tip. So when I go into any of the certification exams, I'm always trying to spot the errors, like, you know, what's...
Almost work backwards,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So you're trying to work through and say, okay, that just doesn't make sense. That will not work. That's incorrect. So by a process of elimination, you're actually going to find the right answer. And that's a really important thing for the pro exam, because the pro exam, professional exam, is long. It's 3 hours. It's a lot of reading.
Wordy questions.
It's very scenario based, so it's a long question, long answers. And the way the answers work is that they might just throw in a little, like...
Small technical inaccuracy.
Yes.
That if you're not on top of it or familiar with the console, you might not.
Yeah, and or it might be something like they'll be asking you things like a storage question, and one of the questions might have, say, so the question might be like, oh, what's the cheapest? And it might have like EFS, EBS, and S3, and they're very similar answers. They're all storage services, but which one's the cheapest? So you have
most cost effective.
Yeah, or the most, yes, of course, the most cost effective. So you have to look at the answer and really understand why it is the right answer. Process of elimination.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I like that. I've seen you doing that. So did we lock in? Yes, we did. We're locking in data API. Is that right?
Yes. Oh,
Number
yeah.
2, which I think we got 2 votes for in the end.
Yes.
Oh, of course, she knows her Redshift. Does Kerry? It is.
I love Redshift, and I talk about it all the time. So you know,
you do. Even in your interview, you talked about it.
Talk about Redshift.
All right, let's check out question number 5. I reckon we've still got time for at least 2 more questions. Yep. Actually. So yes, we are jumping into the well-architected framework. We're doing more of these more recently. So, and having an architect with us, hopefully you can give us a bit of extra information, Kerry. What is an attribute of the reliability pillar, of which there are 5 pillars, of the AWS well-architected framework?
So I talk to a lot of customers about the well-architected framework. This exact framework I talk to a lot of customers about. And in fact, the reason why we do is because there's a bunch of customers I have that are new to AWS Cloud, so they're still learning. But I also have a lot of customers that have been on the cloud for a little while. And I guess, you know, because it's a self-service platform, anyone can just jump on and they can just configure what they need to use. And that's great. That's the whole purpose of it. But sometimes you need to consider what are the best practices that relate to your architecture. So you want to be sure that, you know, you have strong security. You want to be sure that you are tolerant to failure. You want to be sure that you are able to have, you know, strong performance in your applications, in your workload, and you want to architect it that way. So,
and you basically just covered the 5 pillars in that one sentence.
I did. So if we go down the list, and then we can talk a little bit more about it.
Do you want to quickly explain the reliability pillar? This is the first time we've had reliability pillar.
Okay, so the reliability pillar. I can't even
See,
talk.
it's a mouthful. It's not just me who struggles over these questions sometimes.
So the reliability pillar focuses on how you would cope with outages and failures, basically. So because the whole point of, you know, nothing is 100%. We know that. It doesn't matter if you are in the cloud or on-prem, nothing's 100%. It's how you tolerate those failures. How can you automate it such that if there was a failure, how does your infrastructure or how does your workload handle or tolerate that failure? So it's a really important one for a lot of customers because things like, I'll give you an example, auto scaling on an EC2 instance, that's how you can recover from failure. Being able to, you know, you say you have a lot of incoming traffic, and all of a sudden the instance that you have provisioned is overloaded and you don't want your customers getting a poor experience. So auto scaling can help you to automatically recover from that overload by adding instances in. That's an example of how you would handle reliability.
Awesome. So we're looking for something fault tolerant. Let's have a look at our 4 answers.
I've just answered the question.
We've got 100% for the first time. We're going for number 3. So why don't you talk us through 1, 2, and 4, and then we'll come back to 3.
Okay. So number 1, scale vertically to increase aggregate workload availability. Well, that's not going to work Well, you can actually scale vertically for some things. For example, like RDS databases, you could scale in theory vertically because you could actually just make it a bigger instance. But the whole premise of the cloud is that you want to be able to scale horizontally. So
and that's talking more about performance.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's a
right?
performance question. Number 2, stop spending money. So that's the cost optimization.
I think we had that with Drew as
pillar.
well, actually.
Yeah. So we do spend a lot of time talking to customers about how they right-size instances, how they make sure that they are not spending money on instances or infrastructure that they don't need. So that's the cost optimization pillar. Number 4, implement a strong identity foundation. So I'm assuming that's a security thing. So around security and IAM permissions and least privilege. So that's what that pillar is mainly about. So I'm going to lock in number 3.
Pretty much to the T, what you talked about in the beginning. So that's perfect. 100% agreement on the line. Of course, our reliability pillar is number 3. Well done, Kerry. I like the well-architected questions. I think it's helping us all become a lot more familiar with it and how it can really help our customers.
It's how it can help you to implement best practices within your architecture. So it's a really important framework that we talk to a lot of customers about.
And it is in our exams now as well. So,
it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So it's a really important framework. Have a look at it. There's a lot of white papers out there.
It's a great one actually that I'll get John to pop into the chat.
And I particularly talk to customers about, once we start to talk about their journey, we talk about the actual well-architected review.
Oh, yes.
So the well-architected review is actually available to all customers in the console. So if you were to go into the AWS console, you can, if you just type in, yes, you should.
If you're going to go for an exam, please do.
Go into the console and type in the well-architected review, and you'll see.
And Kerry might come out and help you with that.
Yeah.
or any of the
virtually.
architects that we've
I
had
might talk to you on Chime.
That's right.
So a lot of most of us solutions architects are talking to customers about the well-architected framework, or we actually involve our partners as well too. Our partner network is heavily involved in the well-architected framework as well, because we want to make sure that our customers are implementing their best practices in the cloud, because it means that they're going to have
long term.
they're going to have a good experience. They're going to have a good journey. You don't want to have issues where things are failing and you're not unsure.
That could have been picked up if you'd done your well-architected review.
Exactly.
Awesome. Let's jump. I think we've got time for another question. And it looks like S3, so this would be a perfect way. We've got about 5 minutes as well we can spend on it. Okay. All right, here we go. Last one for Kerry today, I think. An Amazon S3 bucket contains sensitive information and should only be accessible from a specific Amazon VPC. Kerry, how can this be configured?
Okay, so Amazon S3 is a really interesting service because it's actually what we call a regional service. And a regional service means that it's not contained within a VPC. So when you provision anything with S3, it's not provisioned within a VPC. So that's a really important thing to understand.
I don't think we've had that pointed out on the show before either, so that's awesome.
And it's highly available. So for those who are not aware, it's our object storage. So you can pretty much store anything in S3. It will scale with you as you need. You only pay for what you use, so you pay for the amount that you store. So it's a really cool service. I think it was one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, John, it was one of the first services released for AWS. Yeah, it was. I think behind SQS. Yes. You are right. So it's been a service that's been running for a long time. So there's a lot of interesting features that have been added to S3 over time.
That's right.
So if we skip to the question, so if we look at number 1.
Have a quick look through.
Have a quick look. So if we look at the first answer, add a security group to the bucket. Well, security groups actually pertain to EC2 instances. So we don't have security groups when it comes to S3 and buckets. So that's definitely
we can get rid of that one, and no one went for it. I'm very happy to see.
Good. I'll go to number 4, put the bucket in a private subnet. Again, they're not in a VPC. So that actually ruled out 4 straight away when I said, S3 is not actually in a VPC. So we'll get rid of number 4.
Following on from your tip, doing exactly that. Now our poll, Kerry, is split between answers 2 and 3 at the minute.
Yeah.
Most going for number 3.
Okay. So This is an interesting one because an access point, I think that's a fairly new feature. I haven't actually spent a lot of time with that one. But the one thing I do know is it's saying should only be accessible from a VPC. So if we add a bucket policy, that will actually grant access. So I don't think it's number 3. And given the fact that access points is quite a new feature in relation to configuring S3 buckets, I'm actually going to lock in number 2.
Going to go against the grain again.
Yeah, I'm going to go in number 2. I'm going to fingers crossed.
Your theme for episode 17 of season 2, going against our audience on pretty much every question.
I'm really
bar one.
Sorry.
But I love what you did there. It just shows us that, you know, we don't have to be an expert in everything, and you can still whittle down those answers for them to make sense.
Yeah,
right?
and you know what? As a solutions architect, I'm constantly learning. I'm learning the new features and the new, services that are coming out. So I don't always keep up to speed with lots of things that are happening. Sometimes
you just can't.
Yeah,
it's
impossible. Very hard. So for this one, I'm going to lock in number 2.
Locking into new update access point. Most people went for number 3.
Let's see.
Well done. Going with your instinct on access points. We'll get John to put a link to that in. Oh, I think he already has. Fantastic. And I think that takes us to the end of our show today.
Already?
Yeah.
Oh.
30 minutes gone,
I
just
know.
like that.
Went so fast.
And we've only got 1 episode left of season 2 of CQ, so we will be back next week when May rejoins us actually, and she can tell us all about how her certification went.
She's great.
From when she was on.
She's my colleague, so I'm very excited.
I'm
that
so
she's
excited
to be joining.
to have her back on to close us out. But in the meantime, Kerry, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us
you.
again. It's great to have you back.
I
School
love
holidays
coming.
is becoming a bit of a
Yes.
CQ must.
A theme for me.
It's great to have you on. It's great to have all of you with us as always. If you do have any last questions, pop them in the chat. We'll try and get back to you. Otherwise, we will see you next week for our final episode of season 2.
Thanks everyone. See you later.